Brothers Talking is made possible with the financial support of Goodwill Industries of Southeastern Wisconsin and Metropolitan Chicago, and generous Chicagoans like you.
Hello, I am Dr. Obari Cartman, and welcome to Brothers Talking, a monthly program that will bring a cross-generational group of Black men together, creating a safe and brave space for honest discussion about the challenges, opportunities, fears, and strengths of Black men. The goal of Brothers Talking is to amplify and explore the lived experiences of Black men, the pain, joy, success, failure, and resulting pathways for growth and self-discovery. Before we dive into updates on personal goals, let me quickly reintroduce the brothers taking this 10-month journey together. Brother Benjamin Benji Junius, Jordan Sorrell, Daniel Ash, and Reginald Edwards. During our premiere episode, each of the brothers shared a personal goal that they are working towards over our 10 months together, a goal for which they will lean into each other for encouragement and support. Brothers, it's time for updates. We had some really strong updates last time. I was really impressed. I was like, y'all was doing working. Have there been any shifts, any changes, any lessons learned? They don't have to be grandiose every time. I think the small incremental growth is important too. So if there's a little thing that you want to share just along that journey, floor is open.
So my original goal was to put on this big musical production, right?
Yeah.
And over time that has transitioned to directing a staged reading.
Yeah.
And so now that we've begun kind of really exploring what that's going to look like, one of the biggest things has been trying to now create a budget, right? Now trying to really create that space for how do we actually honor artists. And as we're asking for actors and things of that nature, it's important to me to have a nice budget, because just in the theater district in Chicago, sometimes people put in all of this work as actors over the course of weeks, and they get like $100 stipend,
Right.
you know. And I want good actors. I want actors who are committed, and it's a little easier to be committed when you're not worried about if your phone is going to get turned off, or when you're able to actually put gas in your car.
Right.
So I've started looking at what that operational, that functioning budget is going to look like, so that we're actually able to, I like to use the word honor people for lending their gifts.
Nice. And it's a new day. We ain't even doing that no more. They're striking, right? The actors and the artists, and they're saying that we are too valuable to this society to just be starving forever.
Yeah, right.
I'm glad you have that at the top of your mind as a part of the creative process.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So for me, my goal was starting a podcast.
Yeah.
So one of the things I did was I said, let me just start listening to more and more podcasts so I can find my voice more. So I've been doing that pretty often. So I'm at a point now where starting to set meetings up and starting to get more into the weeds of it.
Okay.
Because I was like, let me just start to know the craft and the foundation.
Are you hearing that there's a saturation of certain voices and you need to say something different? Or are you hearing that what is out there is enough and it makes you want to not do it as much?
No, I still want to move forward, because I think still is a voice.
Something unique, something you have to say that no one else is saying?
The stories are different.
Nice.
Like for instance, there are stories that are being told right now and are not being told of individuals that are doing dynamic work and things versus like the everyday names you see or things like that. So that's where it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot anyway. But I'm let's just start now and let's
Yeah.
figure it out, because it's not about being perfect. It's starting to figure, getting there. So, I'm glad to make at least that step of hearing more.
Yeah.
And now it's like, all right, let's start moving forward.
Yeah. Do you get the critique of I've been hearing more people say, take microphones away from Black men, right? There's people kind of annoyed with hearing us talk and podcast and to be in all of the manospheres. Do you hear that, or what do you think about just what it means to put your hat in a ring where people are clamoring for attention? Is that a struggle, or do you I'm gonna stand on my stories. My stories are important.
Well, I stand on conviction and faith. So it doesn't matter what the noise is.
Yeah,
That's one of the things I went out at 23 is I got to cancel the noise. There's always going to be that noise
That's
of,
good, right.
well, should they be in space, should they not? My thing is, well, I'm gonna just create the space and then, learn and grow from that.
Yeah.
Versus, kind of listen to the what ifs and or people should be like canceled or being like taken away the mic. I think it's a longer discussion, a bigger discussion.
Yeah, that's right.
More than anything. But
Yeah.
for me, it's just like if it was put into me, the vision was, now it's time for me to start to move forward and then let the process, let God be God.
Nice. That's good.
I love that.
Yeah.
I do think, and we live in a world where people use media to elevate themselves, and I think that's why you have such a glut in the market, right? With just podcast after podcast, and most people, I think, unfortunately, come to it with a sense of like, how will that platform advance their voice? But the idea, what I hear from you both from the stage, and Jordan, you with your podcast, creating spaces for other stories to be amplified. I think it's a very powerful frame that we need more of, right? So I agree with you, you shouldn't be discouraged. As I listen to both Benji and Jordan, I'm thinking about my goal, which is to develop sort of my charter, my plan for this new stage of life that I'm entering as an empty nester, as an aging professional, Black male professional. And while the therapy that I'm doing has been extremely helpful, one thing that I've started to do is read for pleasure. And this came out of therapy, I would say. Like I have been so focused on career.
Yeah.
And my career happens to be about community, right? So that's a blessing. But nonetheless, I've been so focused on community impact, social impact, the work, that I felt I wasn't as imaginative as I once was. So the idea of discovering and rediscovering fiction, just good storytelling, to just allow myself space to dream again, right? I mean, very rarely do we talk about older men, especially dreaming about what they want to be, right? We encourage younger folks, or at least we should encourage younger folks to do that. And some could say we don't do that enough. But as we age, you have to become serious and get to business, right? So like trying to create space for me, this is my progress. I say, I'm just gonna pick up a novel and read it. It may be trashy, it may be profound, but if it's a good story and it's gonna pull me through it, it's gonna release something in me, I believe.
Do you find reading gives more space for the dreaming than watching stories on TV?
I think so, for me, yeah. I've always, going back to when I was young and it's growing up in a relatively small town, reading opened up the world to me. And so, the pages, I know it's cliche to say, but it's true. And you can get that through all of the content on Netflix and other platforms. But there's something special about creating your own scenes in your own head. As you all know, I used to work in radio. So the idea of like listening to radio, you essentially create the pictures, they create the sound, right? With reading novels, you do both, right? And of course, you're guided by the author. So all of that just works a different part of your brain. But again, for me, as I think about my journey, it just dawned on me. I'm thinking like a counselor would think when they're advising you about like, okay, even the language I'm using. Like, what's the next charter of life? What's the charter for the next stage of life? And I had somebody say, man, what the hell are you talking about? And it's just like, it's like, well, what do you want to be in your next stage, right? And so giving myself permission to paint those pictures.
And discover.
The reading does that for me.
I love it.
Yeah, I think to add on to what he was talking about, that's one of the things I do love about reading, being able to read and then be able to create in your own mind what that character sounds like, what the house looks like that they're in or whatever they're doing. And then when it gets brought to movie, it kind of ruins my imagination. Oh, that's not how I pictured it. That's not, or they picked the wrong person for their role or whatever the case may be. But in regards to my goal, I've said that I haven't really been meditating like I wanted to. But then I sat back after just listening to some of them. I sat back and I realized, me walking my dog I don't really, I'm not on my phone. I'm usually just walking him and just looking at the neighborhood, looking at the trees, or me taking a bath. I take a bath like at least 4 or 5 times out the week because it relaxes me. And I realized like that's a form of my meditation. So I have been meditating.
You should call it mindfulness.
Mindfulness, I think, would be a better word for it. Yeah. So my progress with that has been, I think, very well. And then in addition to that, I've been journaling for the last 2 years since my mom passed away. And I decided I'm gonna make it a book. So I'm really excited. AI has kind of been helpful with that, turning my journal entries into like a story mode.
Oh, nice.
So I'm really excited about it now, especially now that the AI stuff is helping me out. So I just have to tweak some things, and I don't know if I'm going to write it as my personal story, or I'm going to write it as a fictional character, because I want to expose a lot of my life, but then I'm also going to be exposing some other people, and I don't know if I really want to do that yet. So yeah,
you gonna change our names?
I got you.
That didn't happen.
I got you, man.
Okay. Well, good. Progress is good. So let's get into the topic for today.
At Goodwill, we transform lives through the power of work. We believe work is at the heart of human potential. Through a bold mission of connecting people to work, preparing people for life, Goodwill Industries of southeastern Wisconsin and metropolitan Chicago is creating meaningful impact in the communities where we live, work, and serve. By eliminating barriers, we are making fulfilling work available to all so that individuals and communities can thrive. Go to goodwillsew.com to learn how to have the power to support our mission.
So our discussion topic today is Black men and colorism. According to a study published by the National Library of Medicine, through negative African American stereotypes, out-group members, aka white people, perceived light-skinned African Americans favorably and dark-skinned African Americans unfavorably. Using data from a 1995 Detroit area study and the 2003 National Survey of American Life, the study investigated these relationships among African American men representing a wide range of socioeconomic groups. The study found that African American men's perception of out-group and in-group treatment, respectively, were similar across time. Light-skinned men perceived the least out-group discrimination, while dark-skinned men perceived the most out-group discrimination. In appraisals of skin tone, discrimination from in-group members, aka Black people, medium-skinned men perceived the least discrimination, while both light and dark-skinned men perceived more in-group discrimination. Additionally, men of lower socioeconomic groups were more affected by skin tone bias than others. It's 2024. Is colorism still a thing? Do y'all still think about how white people perceive you based on your complexion? Are dark-skinned men self-conscious about being seen as a threat or less attractive? Are those that consider themselves light-skinned insecure about not being seen as Black enough, whatever that means? Is there a light-skinned privilege for Black men? And a lot of this conversation has been about how white people see us, but how does colorism work amongst us? How does skin color affect how we treat each other? Brothers, let's talk about it. I'm starting to see more young people on the social medias do the light skin versus black skin thing. Amongst adults, do y'all feel like this is still relevant? Do y'all think about skin colors? It's something I don't really think about, talk about. Maybe there's some medium skin bias, right? Maybe from the other ends of the spectrum, people have to move it, navigate it differently. But I don't know, when you think about the topic colorism, does it still feel relevant? And how has it shown up in your work, your relationships, and your social relationships? We got one chocolate brother, right? We missed Gator and Xavier going today. I don't even know what y'all consider yourself. Like, you're not light-skinned enough to be light-skinned, really. A mocha. Peanut butter, right? I don't know, beyond just the poetry of it, do you still feel like there's a racial valuation of skin color?
You know, you made a comment earlier while you were just talking about walking in spaces and feeling it as a dark skin. Oh, I'm just gonna speak for myself as a dark skinned man. Sometimes I have the notion of walking to places and when I'm in a room full of white people and saying, "Hey, Reggie, make sure you smile. Make sure you show them you're not the typical NIGGA that they usually see, or whatever the case may be." Or when I'm walking at night, I make sure I have my hood off or whatever, because I don't want to be presented as somebody who's going to rob them or whatever the case may be. But also, it also made me think about my own colorist, I don't want to say remarks, but what's the internal colorism problems that I have within myself. Like when I'm walking down the neighborhood, am I more scared of a dark skinned guy? And I'm dark skinned. Am I more scared of a dark skinned guy versus, well, I lock my doors faster if it was. But then I realized I lock my doors. It can be a white man, or a dark skinned man, Indian man. I'm still locking my doors because it's just where we live. But I'm starting to become more aware of when I feel kind of like more guarded with myself as well. And then when I do catch those moments, I try to sit down with myself like, is that a colored thing? Is this a male thing? Like what it is. Sometimes I can't figure it out. And that's something I still kind of battle with from time to time.
Interesting. You say walk into a room, see white people, and then something goes off. And we talk about like a code switch sometimes, but I think there's something deeper than that, like a valuing of, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I think that when you walk into a room, when I walk into a room of white people, I think that there's something that we've been trained or kind of programmed to do to become, so that we don't come off as intimidating, so that we don't come off as a threat almost. So, I mean, I'm only 5'8", but if there is a white woman that I'm like approaching and her back is turned to me, I'm letting her know I'm coming before I get close to her, right? And you are smiling a little more, right? You're sitting up a little more. Like there's a particular, because the thing is, this is gonna sound a little nuts, but it's almost like the color of your skin, even the shade of your skin, in some ways kind of translates to class. Where if you are, and this may be, I'm kind of in between, but if you are darker skin, right, you probably have to work a little harder. If you're a lighter skin, it's probably a little easier. Not saying that it doesn't exist for you, but from what I have seen, people who don't necessarily look like me or share the same shade sometimes have it harder or a little easier. Dark skin approaches my car or is walking near my car, I am guilty of, lock the door, like real quick, right? But I honestly can say, shamefully, I don't necessarily do that when a white person walks by. I think if I've done it if a white person is walking by, it has been like in the last like couple of years of like civil unrest and just a lot of division, right?
And there would have to be other markers of danger. The white man, he would have to look disheveled.
There would have to be something else going on.
And for me, I also be like, I can take him. And that sounds pretty bad, but like that's something that goes through my mind sometimes. Oh well, something goes down, I know I can take them.
And we see darker black men as stronger, and they could beat our ass. That's so interesting.
I was sorry, I'm gonna cut you off. I was gonna say that though, in terms of sometimes when you think about colorism and people perceiving threats, particularly on spies, I'm a little bit more, husky and everything. So sometimes people see that as a threat, versus like, what if I was skinnier and a shorter guy? Would somebody still have the same response as well too? So I think sometimes those unconscious things go on, and let me step back. Sorry, I heard you talk about stepping in a room and everything. I don't know if I've thought about it as much. I think sometimes for my class, I do when I step into certain like rooms or spaces. I can be very conscious about it, but maybe it's because of privilege and or how my mother enculturated me when I was younger. I used to go, so she tried to intentionally make me go into more segregated or white spaces. So I got more comfortable in doing so. So I feel comfortable in doing it, but I still keep who I am too. It's not like I'm code switching or if I'm being not black enough or trying to code switch, I feel like I'm talking white or things like that. So I think that's more for me. That's helped me
You think
navigate
your
that.
mother did a good thing by training you to be more comfortable around white people?
I think she trained me about being both. It's about
okay.
being in spaces, being almost uncomfortable as only black person in a room, but also being able to go in all black spaces as well too. You know, because sometimes it's like, well, am I going to lose myself if I'm going too far, or can I still go back to the barbershop? Can I still go on 55th in Michigan and still do that too? So I'm like, you know, I appreciate my mom giving me that lesson. Because I feel like some of us lose ourselves because we're trying to prove who we are. Because it's like, well, we've made it, so now we're in these spaces, and now we forget where we come from. And when we go back or when we go into certain places, like, no, I can't do that because I don't feel safe or comfortable.
The reason I asked about the parenting perspective is because I got 2 boys, right? And I've had to think about what it meant to take him out of the school on the south side, the family school, you know, in the neighborhoods, cultural, and put him in the north side school, Disney, right? And I had to be careful about not saying you at a better school because he was around more white people or more diverse people, right? And so this idea that we try to give our kids better opportunities, make them comfortable, but then we subtly telling them that the closer you get to white people, the better you are. And the further you get away from black people, right? I think that there's messages underneath that stay with us, right? So I don't know, there's something around this proximity to whiteness. And we talk about color, but it's also dress, it's diction, it's language, it's, you know, I soften my tone, my voice it gets higher pitched. Like there's so many things that happen. And I have to feel like white people have no idea how much work we do. they just living their life, right? And I don't know, maybe they have their own things that they bend around, but there's so much that we do to perform for them that it seems exhausting, right?
Yeah. I mean, just hearing this conversation, it reminds me of how complex this is, right? How complex this issue is. I hadn't thought about this before we began taping this, but just hearing you all talk made me think about my 3 sons. My first son is an adopted son, and he's much. He's further along the spectrum than me when it comes to blackness. He's a darker black man. He's 25 now. And then my wife and I had a son. My wife is white. And so I have a son who has blue eyes. He's very fair skinned. And just hearing the story made me think about Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, right? And there are lots of studies that looked at how people respond to blackness, how white people respond, and white people respond. So I had 2 young sons, 3 years apart, in the playground, and I saw black and white folks react to them differently.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. I hadn't thought about those experiences in quite a while. Right? I really had not. But I remember seeing it.
Yeah.
And I remember not addressing it head on with anybody, but just helping, particularly my oldest son, my adopted son, understand that he's beautiful too. You know, people see those blue eyes and they will react to my son.
Yeah.
And actually, I quite frankly, when he watches this, he's going to be mad when I hear this. I actually think when you're constantly praised over and over and over and over again about something, I actually think it creates harm. It creates damage. It creates you're the psychologist, but I think there's something there that like gets triggered in a negative way inside of a child's brain, right? But what we've tried to do as parents is to make sure that everybody in the family is beauty everywhere. Just because you're not being called out, it's not your fault. It's there.
Yeah.
Now, I would say this: growing up in an almost exclusively black environment, socially, folks who were lighter skinned there were certain assumptions made about behavior, about intelligence, about capacity, potential, And I do think all of it, as we all know, is just related to racism, like
Right,
the
right.
hierarchy of human value, how
Right,
that gets
right.
attached to race. And I believe my parents, even though they treated me, and again, I was adopted too, I think differently than they treated my adopted brother. Again, we're not biologically, my parents, my adopted
No,
parents.
the adopted brother was white.
You know, he was black. My parents I was adopted into a black family. My 2 boys were adopted, but my brother would look just like Benji, right?
Okay.
But he was treated differently than it was, because when I was, my dad used to joke when I was a little baby, he would hate to go into a store with me because people would think he stole somebody's child.
Oh, wow.
'Cause he was so dark skinned.
Yeah.
But anyway, but we were treated differently. But the thing that I think about
Differently better? You were treated better?
Yeah. This is in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this doesn't exist today, but there was a difference. As I reflect back on my experience and how my kids were treated by outsiders, what we tried to do is sort of smooth that out. The one thing I want to say in response to this constant sort of code switching, I do think it happens both with intra-community and sort of inter-community, right? So when we're in black spaces, we're black people, I do think I've had to make efforts to make sure people understood I'm just as black as my brother.
Yeah. How do you do that? What does that look like?
I mean, I think but that's a complicated question too. But I think it was like growing up, I was saying earlier to some folks about making sure people knew I was tough. I was athletic. Right? I wasn't scared. You know, we always got to like camouflage. We talked about before in the show how we deal with fear, right? We all have fear with it, but sometimes, you know, being a man, being a black man, you have to like, no, I got this, I got this, right? Always sort of present in a certain way. The idea about how we express emotion. So I think you over-index in trying to prove yourself, and which has an issue of sort of like manliness, but black manliness too, right? So within the community, there's a level of, you know, contorting to a certain image just so people understand I'm cool, right? The last point I just want to share this before I shut my mouth. When I think about the code switching, like my mother was teaching us code switching very deliberately, not because she wanted us to be safe. Right. And so as I moved through my career, my mom was always saying, hey, Daniel, don't be too aggressive. When I got to college and I got involved in movement work, it freaked out my mom. Like, oh my God, you know, you're gonna be like that Malcolm X. Right? And I was adopted by so a great generation, black folks who were born in the late 20s, early 30s. And so my mom had that posture, like, safety. My dad, very black man, he was the man who every time I shook someone's hand, you know, he's like, or his hand, like, look at me, like, you know, stand up. Like if you slouch, you know, you remember you had that uncle, that father that you slouch, sit up, right? I still have that voice in my head to this day. And so it was interesting how my mother was always intentional about keeping us safe. My dad, for both my brother and I, again, different skin tones, he wanted us to be seen as confident men, no matter what. Knowing that being my brother, it may be more threatening coming from him than me, right? But he made it real clear, like, walk tall, you know, how we dress, you know, my dad was very intentional about like ironing your clothes and like dressing a certain way. Looking at people a certain way. So I think all of it, you know, when it comes down to it for me personally, it was depending on where you land on the color spectrum, your strategies for surviving and creating comfortable spaces for you to be in it's always present. It just showed up differently.
But I imagine that backfires around white people. So you stand tall, looking people in the eye, but as a boss, people might be intimidated by that or find that aggressive, like have to. So you have to find out when to strong or when to soft.
Oh yeah, I had my first executive coach early in my career, and for those who know, I'll share this. Like the president, CEO of an organization, and so about 20 years ago, I had my first executive coach, which is actually a privilege to be on a career ladder, and somebody says like, we want to invest in you because the company paid for it. The first executive coach said to me, Daniel, you need to soften your presence. Because I had been taught, like when you're in a room, you look at folks, right? You look at folks. And then she said to me, I'll never forget, she was in many ways a good coach, so I'm not trying to critique her harshly. But one time, she said, like, Daniel, you lean in too, and that makes people, pull back. That I really struggle with that, right? Because basically she's telling me to do what my father told me not to do.
That's right.
What I've had to learn how to do is, like, in many ways, she was right? There are times when you have to know how to lean in, and then no matter what race you are, what gender you are, right, how to lean in. But being a Black executive, I had to learn how to read the room. This is what you're talking about in terms of, like, in order to code switch, you got to read the room.
That's right.
Like, brilliantly.
Yeah. I've been finding that we're in a moment now that seems like there might be some shifts in the culture and I don't know. I don't work around white people as much as y'all do. My world is very, very Black. But when I enter white worlds, when I get invited to stuff, I have found that they really wanted me to come in as Black as I am. And that we still sometimes tiptoe around stuff. And then when we say, no, this is about Black folk, this is Black work, I've found that they're welcoming that. And that sometimes before we get into the door, we soften in a way that like manages our Blackness unnecessarily because we've been used to it. But I got a curriculum. I got white people out of Massachusetts, and every time I would present content, I was like, okay, this is gonna be the day this white people say, I'm not gonna pay for this no more. Like, this is too Black. And they were like, no, I want it. They want the real, they want authentic, they want Black, they want it in a way. Post George Floyd, I think that there's a window that opened up that's saying they want us to be as Black and as free and as authentic as possible. Are y'all feeling that? Are y'all feeling like there's more permission now to be more open, more free, more yourself, to not have to code switch as much, to really just like stand on who you are in a more authentic way?
That's interesting you say. I think I'll just talk about this first part of this decade. I think in the first part, when I post George Floyd, I think there was permission to do so. People were like, oh yeah, we see the plight and we see structural racism, things like that. So it's okay to lean in and be Black, and we're going to accept that. I think now as we start to get more removed, we've lost it, and we come back to this more traditional sense, you can be Black, but not too Black, right? Some of your comments, we've seen some instances where some people in leadership, unfortunately, because they've been Black, but they've been in white-centered cultures, have been let go, unfortunately. True. And and probably they wouldn't have done so if we were probably in a certain period. So yeah, I think we're still struggling with that as well. The other thing I want to mention was around code switching. I think sometimes we do code switching, particularly around safety. We're talking about this whole colorism part. I just thought about this when I was growing up. Part of the reason why I shrunk back, especially being a young Black boy as I was growing up, because I wanted to make sure I was safe, especially around law enforcement and others.
That's true.
There's
a talk. We want the kids to come home safe.
Right.
So and I struggle with that. I'm actually curious about your position on the talk being say what's right, yes or no. Sorry, it feels yes or no are bossy sometimes. The way we train kids to survive the police encounter. And I found that the young men don't respond to that because they don't like feeling like they are cowarding. But for safety purposes, I do. I want my sons to get home if they get pulled over. But it becomes a dilemma in the moment. Like, how much do I, or do I just, I ain't do nothing wrong, right?
As a father, that's the line that you want to watch. You don't want. My mother wanted me to cower, and all due respect to my late mother, but it was don't be noisy, don't draw attention to yourself. My dad was on the other side. I think we have to be really, what I've taught to my boys who are now all young men, 18, 23, 25 years old, is be thoughtful about every situation, right? So a funny story, my sons are very confident young men. My oldest two boys went to Mount Carmel High School. And they said, oh, Dad, they had figured it out, right? They just like, they were comfortable being confident. And this is the police tactic, because a lot of police officers have kids at Mount Carmel. They always wear their Carmel gear.
That's right, yeah. So
and they say it changes everything. And they say, oh,
Yeah.
Dad, it changes everything, right? Because he said they could be on the train, and there may be a guy who is a police officer who went to St. Rita, and he gonna say something about like, oh, you went to, like, and it becomes like, and all of a sudden they weren't a menacing or potentially menacing black boy. They were like, oh, you play ball at Carmel, right? You know, but that was really smart, because then they could still be very confident, because the thing what they teach you at Mount Carmel, which is one reason why I was comfortable with the school for my sons, is that they teach you to be confident as young people, right? And I wanted them to have that, but then they adapted, right? They say, okay, it's like, and I know this is something you have to do in our society, right? But presenting the Carmel badge, they knew what relax, particularly folks on law
I use a
enforcement.
PhD in the same way that your sons use.
I use University of Chicago. In the same way. I mean, literally, Oberlin, Princeton, University of Chicago. Right? I still walk around with my Oberlin sweatshirt, because I know it sends us a message. Even if they don't think I went there, they may think I have a kid that went there, that's going there, right? And then that opens up a conversation. But we do those things.
It's still so much work, though. It's
work.
So I just get back from Toronto, and before I came back into the United States, me and my fiance, we drove, and I had a mistaken identity at the border, and they arrested me.
Oh, shit.
Not the person who they was looking for, but I got nervous because it was mostly white officers, but it was one black officer that stood out. The white officers, in my opinion, from my perspective, I felt like were being a little bit too rough. They put the handcuffs on me. I said, "Yo, this is kind of tight," and he got an attitude. I was like, you know what? I still have to stand up for myself. I still have to say something. So I said, "Sir," and it did feel kind of like me, like, oh, you know, authority, like, you know, those lines of authority. I'm like, "Sir, hey, these handcuffs are," he got an attitude. I'm like, "Reggie, keep your composure, you know, like, you're a black man, you're not, you're in another country, and you just want to make it back home safe." But then the black officer, he's like, "I got you." He's like, "Calm down." He's like, "I got you. I'm going to work with him and work with you, and, you know, we're going to figure everything out." And it helped that the other black officer was there, because I don't think I would have remained as calm as I did. Then after everything was done, I asked the white officer, I said, "I think you owe me an apology because, you know, your attitude." He's like, "I was just doing my job." I said, "It's a way about it, though." And then I felt myself trying to, like, about to get angry, but, you know, I was like, you know what? I got 7 more hours to go. Well, 6 more hours to go. I'm just gonna head home without saying nothing. But I thought about my skin color. I thought about the other black officers standing there. And it kind of did make me feel good. There was another dark-skinned black officer that was there. And it just made me feel a little bit more comfortable in that situation.
Wow, I'm sorry to happen.
You know what? As you're saying that, it's interesting to me, because I avoid road trips. Right? I don't go on road trips. If it's farther than like an hour and a half, I'm not going. Right? I'm not driving there. I'll probably end up flying somehow. And so whenever my sister and her husband and the kids decide they want to drive to Chicago from, like, Mississippi, I'm scared, right? And not so much for my sister, but her husband is just, you know, tall, dark-skinned, dreads. He liked to wear snapbacks and Jordans, and just you know, he is who he is. He's being himself, right? But it also makes me nervous, because it's like, okay, if they get pulled over, you know, what do they see? And I don't even go out past a certain time. I get invited to many things, right? But if it starts after 6 o'clock.
After 6, wow.
I'm probably not gonna make it. So I've like trained myself just over the years to where it's like my bedtime is at 9 o'clock, so I can't make it, right? And but I do that intentionally. Like I don't like being outside at night, right? Like I have a car that has tinted windows, which is one of the biggest mistakes I think I've ever made to myself, because I just think there's something that comes with you have a black car, black tinted windows. I just feel like it's a magnet. But let's pull over and see what's happening in the car. And I guess there is a particular like level of fear for me where it's like I'm literally like a black man, like, you know, I live in Tinley Park. I'm not going outside, you know, and so to be driving at hours of the night, whether I'm coming or going, for me, it's just like not a smart thing to do, right? I've never gotten into a physical fight. I've never had an issue with the law or anything like that. And I really feel that I would struggle with whatever the response would be. Like I would respond to them the way I would really respond to anyone else. But that's part of why I don't go out at night, because I know who some of my friends are who are very themselves. But it also puts us in a position of, because they fail, sometimes they may see this, oh well, but sometimes they fail to realize that sometimes, for me, Benjamin's perspective, you don't necessarily have to have the last word, right? It's about taking control of the situation. And with them being who they are, it's like, this not right, y'all didn't pull them up, y'all didn't do, you know, and it comes to a place of like, let's manage the situation. But sometimes because they fail to do that, I don't want to be around them. I don't want to go to restaurants with them. Anything that can make it seem like Benjamin, just guilty by association, is scary.
I struggle with that. I struggle when I have friends that are very opinionated and will stand up for when they see any type of discrimination or, because I'm just like, okay, it's ways to go about it. But then I also think like we have it's sometimes being soft and being nice about it does not work. So then I have my friends who are, I ain't trying to go to jail. Like I got too much stuff I got going on, and I'm like, I ain't got time to be arguing with nobody. And I'm just trying to go home. But my friends be like, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. We didn't get served this, or whatever the case may be, or they doing this because we black. I'm just like, and then it makes me, I battle with that because I'm just like, should I be saying something too? Should I be a little bit more outspoken? And I think I will be. But if it's not personally done to me, I can let a lot of stuff go. But I struggle with that.
I mean, I get it, and I get all the safety, the fear. I get it. I just hate this for us. Like why we can't just go on road trips and go out and like just go eat? Like I just hate this for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same way that we may see, you know, white professionals, white men, white women. Just white human beings in general, I think that we take those standards or that fear and somehow we make it a part of our own community. You know, we bring it into where now the lightest one on the spectrum is, I don't want to see you crying. What's your struggle? You know, because when I see a white person cry, it's like, what are you crying for? Because you don't know what a struggle is, right? Like, what are you upset about? Because I can tell you centuries of struggle. But then when it's internalized into a community, and now you have the darker and the light skins, you have who was in Master's house and who was working the field, right? When it's time to have that conversation, it becomes more, there's an element of it where it's like sex appeal, right? Now you have women who, in my experience, you have women who may be darker, who it's like, I can't be with a dark skinned man because I don't want my children to come out dark, you know. It becomes I want to be with a light skinned man so they could at least have a chance of being kind of like that middle brown.
You know, my mom, and I love her, and I feel bad talking about her, but she used to tell my sister, she was like, date a light skinned man. My mother was born in 1938, so she's older. She comes from that generation. And me and my sister would often correct her. She was like, we'll need them some black ass babies. I'm like, Mama, you can't say stuff like that. I'm black. I'm black as they come. But she would say those remarks, but I also took into effect her generation. She got hosed down. She did protests. She did all that stuff. So I think in her mindset, she was just trying to, and I may be making this up, but I think she was a little bit colorist too, but I'm kind of afraid because now my sister's gonna curse me out. But I feel like my mother was a little bit colorist, but it's also because of her background that she came from as well.
Did you feel that? Did you feel like you were
mom got
less than?
When she would get upset with me and I did something wrong, she'd call me a black ass nigga, and that would kind of hurt me. It wasn't until I got older where I started to have those conversations. Like you cannot call me that when you get upset. You can't. That cuts me deep. When I was a child, I attempted to bleach my skin because I hated being dark skinned.
Wow.
I was there's just kids always always had something to say, and I didn't really like it. I was predominantly like the only maybe like 2 or 3 dark skin. I went to predominantly black school, but predominantly I was like really the only dark skinned guy. So I went home, bleached my skin. I was like, nah, this messing up my skin. I can't do this no more. But then I had to really grow to really love the skin I was in, and I do. Then I turned bald. Then that was a whole nother little thing I had to accomplish. But then it really taught me just like to love myself for who I am. So yeah,
I'm curious.
Did you ride the shifts where like black and light skin go in and out, depending on who's hot at that moment? And so there's times when like I want it to be darker because like Aaron Hall, I don't know who's the what you described as the dark skin.
I think I started to love being dark skinned actually, and this might sound kind of bad, but when I started to get hit on more, that's when I started to feel a little bit more attractive, and then it's kind of worked to my benefit because I get hit on by everybody now, but but I don't know, maybe I peaked in high school, like maybe junior year, senior year, but that was like, okay, well, maybe I do look good for a dark skinned guy.
Not for a dark skin. That's
exactly. But that's what I felt like during that time. I felt like like that's how it started. I felt like I looked good for a dark skinned guy. So
I'm curious about that because you talked about I feel beautiful because I'm dark skinned guy. It's like, why can't I just feel beautiful because I'm a black person, right? Like, where's the community in all this? Like, I feel like it's a loss of community. It's a loss of opportunity. Like, I should say I got you, or because of who you are, not because black, light skin, things like that. I think it's just a really missed opportunity now. And I would think in this era we're in, technology, space, and things like we can get closer, but it feels like we're getting further away. Don't know why, but I'm like, how do we return to that? Return to the roots. I think that's where we can start solving and start becoming closer versus all this colorism or all these other things.
And I think about very specific things, like what do we say to children? Just that we pass them by. What do we say to the range of the colors of children that we see that are black? And how do we affirm them for who they are? How do we encourage them to see themselves as beautiful, whatever they are, right? And not like cherry pick what we think is the features that are more desirable to us. But that takes the work, I feel like for me, is like to find the training that happened in my brain to see preference and to associate value with certain blue-eyed and hair textures and diction, Queen's English. There's so many things that have been trained to think of were beautiful and smarter and better, that if I don't see myself operating in that way, then we just naturally infect the children with our biases that we're trained in. So that becomes a question. Like, how do we change it by identifying that and then speaking something different to the children that we see?
So how do we love ourselves first?
Sure,
because we can't, if we don't love ourselves and are accepted, you can't tell us somebody else, you know? It's like having a half empty glass of water. And you're trying to fill somebody else up. And I think that's we're starting to see it and carry it more and more. So we talk to children down the street or a young adult or even an adult. We can't say that because do we even believe in? Do we live it ourselves daily? That's a question I think a lot of us are struggling with, but people don't want to really vocalize or show that outwardly. So do stuff that's just counterproductive and contradictory to that.
There's a lot of work to do. I think that it's a pretty systemic issue. I think what we're doing in our households, what we're doing with children, is easier said than done because, okay, yes, a child is beautiful. Yes, a child has value regardless of the shade of their skin. But then they go to school. It's like, okay, why does our school have less resources than that school?
Yeah.
Why does this school get more, why do they get awarded more scholarships? Why do they have more qualified teachers? Why do they have better lunches? I don't know. Why do they go on more field trips? It's like, okay, we can say it in our household, but then we have this much larger issue.
And the TV, what are they watching? What are the images
what are they
they're
watching on
seeing?
TV? Because they're seeing beautiful people in beautiful gowns, a beat face, a beautiful wig, fighting. So then it's like, okay, now what's the message? Now you can go outside and act a fool. So we lack a lot of balance, and we're up against a lot because now we are battling against mainstream media. We're battling social media. We're battling all of these other areas of influence outside of like what mom and dad teach us in the house. And so I think that we can teach those things. We can do our best, but we're still one of all of these other influences that we end up being, to your point, counterproductive.
No, I find myself being very deliberate with young, dark-skinned black boys.
Me too.
And acknowledging their intelligence. To your point about being lighter skinned and not being seen as an athlete, we tell the young, dark-skinned boys that's all they are. Their physical prowess is the thing. And so I think that, we do need to push back against the images that are produced on TV and the stereotypes that are happening, and carve conversations with schools that are difficult so they can address these issues, and in the home. I think all of it. I think we got to do all of it. Yeah. But you're right, it's work, man. It's just so much work.
I do feel hopeful because what I'm seeing with younger people, and I'm privileged to like have a front row seat to a lot of young adults. I really do feel that young adults are reclaiming their bodies. And I'm using that word intentionally because I think the black body, whether it's a light-skinned black body or a dark-skinned black body, has been, quite frankly, used against us, right? It's been eroticized, fetishized, it's been feared, it's been threatened. And I think what you see in many platforms, in many venues, in many spaces, I should say, younger people reclaiming. It's almost like deflecting the outside gaze and creating sort of a new interpretation of themselves, right? Like, for example, I think about, and I know this is still in a university context, but my youngest son goes to Howard. And there's no perfect place. We all know that. Every place is in a state of growth and progress. But the joy that community embrace that I was able to witness when he was entering that school blew me away, right? When we were talking earlier about the folks who use media platforms, but a couple months ago when I saw Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharp, they're on ESPN. They both went to their alma maters, which are historically black schools, and broadcasts from there. And it wasn't just what I witnessed. It wasn't just the promotion of those schools as options for black folks, but seeing black community, the entire spectrum, like celebrated, and not just for the sports, but for all the other things. I think about I was listening to Jamila Woods' album. Her most recent album, she's a local artist, came up through Young Chicago Authors. And I think like what she's doing with her art form, right? And there are lots of folks in her community that I think brilliantly done, right? But I think young people who are listening to this type of content, experiencing this type of content, are being continuously motivated to like create new norms, like for how we deal and operate, how we work as a community and deal with color.
Yeah.
The last thing I'm reflecting on is every summer I'm one of those folks, those house heads that goes to the Chosen Few picnic. And I know that's evolved over the years, but one thing that's sort of brilliant about those moments is that it's our community, right? All of it being celebrated, right? From the lightest of light skins to the darkest of brothers, like just in community. I think we need more spaces like that, and we don't need them to be once a year. We need them to be sort of ever present. But I think the more we do in that regard, the better able we will be in helping young people see themselves and see that value reflected back at themselves in their
What's
day-to-day.
interesting about the examples you're giving is it reminds me of the stats we read in the beginning about lower socioeconomic communities, Black communities, experiencing the bias even more. And that's when I still see the light-skinned, dark-skinned competition. The Jimmy Lee Woods, the YCA, the college, the university, I feel like those young people are developing and embracing in a different way than in the hood.
Exactly.
And so I think there's a particular type of intervention, if you will, that needs to happen in places where young people aren't as exposed to the range of affirmation.
Exactly. But I think just building on your point, that's why we have to be more intentional about going to communities that are facing deeper, greater socioeconomic hardships, right? And bring them into those spaces, right? You can't just assume like the Black boys and girls that go to Whitney Young, you solve for them, you solve for everybody.
That's right.
That's not enough.
The 100 Black men.
It's not enough. It's important because we need it. But we also need to make sure that those organizations have the capacity to reach even deeper into community. And as a member of the Chicago's philanthropic community, it's our job to make sure folks have that capacity, right? Sometimes we get satisfied with the Du Bois model, right? You get that 10%, 15%, 20%, you're like, okay, we're good. That's not enough.
Absolutely.
At Goodwill, we transform lives through the power of work. We believe work is at the heart of human potential. Through a bold mission of connecting people to work, preparing people for life, Goodwill Industries of southeastern Wisconsin and metropolitan Chicago is creating meaningful impact in the communities where we live, work, and serve. By eliminating barriers, we are making fulfilling work available to all so that individuals and communities can thrive. Go to goodwillsew.com to learn how to have the power to support our mission.
On the next Chicago Newsroom 2.0, Mass Exodus. What's behind the increasing number of companies moving their headquarters out of the city? We'll unpack the issue with Block Club Chicago's Jamie Nesbitt Golden and Emmy Award-winning journalist Samantha Thomas. Join the conversation Wednesday at 7 p.m. on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN-TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
And once again, our time together has come to a close too quickly. Fortunately, we'll be coming back to the circle next month for another hour together in conversation and community. For those of you watching at home or work or from your favorite park bench, thank you for taking this journey with us. It is our hope that together we can support and encourage one another to give ourselves and each other the space and the grace to be and to feel with the freedom we deserve to be and feel. The physical and emotional well-being of Black men doesn't always get the spotlight it deserves, but together we're committed to doing our part to change that. Thank you for stepping into the space with an open mind and an open heart and a commitment to creating space for brothers to talk and share and learn more about themselves and each other. Until next time, Chicago, I'm Dr. Obari Cartman, and good night.